Welcome to Momentum for Change, Voices of the Missouri Movement. This is a monthly podcast produced by your coalition, and I am your host, Nora Mosby, a member services specialist at the Missouri Coalition Against Domestic and Sexual Violence. We hope that you enjoy this conversation coming to you directly from Voices of the Missouri Movement. Some episodes of Momentum for Change have conversations that include content and descriptions of domestic and sexual violence, which may be alarming or activating for some listeners. Please take care and visit the MOCADSV website or call our office to connect with supportive services. Welcome to episode 4 of season 4 of Momentum for Change. This is your host, Nora Mosby, and it's April. April is Sexual Assault Awareness Month, and this is a very important time in our movement. It's a time where we shine a light on the harm that is caused by sexual assault. We increase awareness on the issue, and we share action steps that we can all take to prevent sexual assault from ever occurring again. It's also a time to reflect on the progress that we've made as a movement and to consider how we can best continue to support survivors in the future. Today, in recognition of Sexual Assault Awareness Month, we are celebrating an organization that has been working to support survivors and to end sexual assault in both Missouri and Kansas for the last 50 years. 2025 marks the 50th anniversary of MOCSA, the Metropolitan Organization Countering Sexual Assault, and we are joined by two of MOCSA's leaders, Hallie Rillinger and Julie Donnellan. Hallie and Julie, thank you so much for joining us for this discussion today. As we're getting started, would you all like to introduce yourselves and tell us a little bit about your role at MOCSA? Hallie, would you like to start?
Yes, I'm Hallie Rillinger, and I am retired from the Metropolitan Organization Countering Sexual Assault. The name was changed, and Julie will talk about that. I'm happy that that has happened. I am currently the chair of the Legacy Committee, and each year I'm on the support committee for the annual community luncheon.
Wonderful. Well, thanks so much for joining us, Hallie. And Julie, what do you do at MOCSA?
Hi, Nora. Thanks for having us. I am the current president and CEO at MOCSA, and I took the lead following Hallie after Hallie's 26 years here. So I have the pleasure of being able to build off what she had built before me.
Wonderful. And I cannot wait to get into some of those things that you have built as a team. So before we do that, if we have any listeners who have never heard of MOCSA before, how do you all describe what you do at MOCSA?
Take it away, Julie.
Thanks, Hallie. Well, MOCSA is an independent rape crisis center, and we provide holistic services to survivors of sexual assault and abuse. So we work with individuals who've been impacted in any way by sexual violence throughout their life. And so we work with children through adults. And then we also provide support to loved ones who are also impacted by the victimization of someone that they care about.
Great.
We provide counseling, a whole host of services to survivors.
And where are you all located at?
We are located in the greater Kansas City metro area, and we serve the 6-county area. So we serve Jackson, Clay, and Platte counties, and Cass County in Missouri, and then Johnson and Wyandotte counties in Kansas.
Great. Hallie mentioned earlier that you recently had a slight name change. Can you tell us about that?
Yes. So this year is MOCSA's 50th anniversary, and we thought it was just an opportune time for us to refresh our brand. And we didn't take that lightly. We wanted to make sure that our new brand took into consideration and brought forward the history of MOCSA, and then also was inspiring as we move forward. So we made a slight name change from, it used to be the Metropolitan Organization to Counter Sexual Assault, and we just changed it to the Metropolitan Organization Countering Sexual Assault. And we felt like that showed our proactive approach to fighting sexual violence. And then with our logo, we redid that as well. And we put a stripe through the letters SA for sexual assault. So it's not just a design element, but it's a bold visual commitment to our mission, which is standing against sexual assault and challenging its presence in the community, and then working to diminish its impact on survivors.
I love that. And I've
You
seen
know,
the new logo. It looks great.
I might just add to that. Over my tenure, new board members would come and say, that is a crazy name. Who knows what MOCSA means? We need to change that. So I think, fortunately, I believe that was finally put to bed after I had been there between 20 and 25 years. There was an extensive review with focus groups, etc. Everyone decided MOCSA was okay.
I agree. I agree. And now the word MOCSA means so much to so many survivors that you have assisted over the years and their families. So you have brought a lot of meaning to the word MOCSA. You both have a combined deep, deep knowledge of the organization. You've been involved for so many years. As you're thinking about the organization, what's something just unique or special that you'd like to talk about that people might not be aware of?
Well, for me, I think it's just the uniqueness of its beginning. And just the broad number of people who have come together to support this cause. The early founders included leadership by the Kansas City, Missouri Police Department, a federal law enforcement grant to look at rape and sexual assault and prosecution. Virtually every prosecutor and every police department in the broad metro area was committed to this cause. Additionally, there were individuals from the University of Missouri in Kansas City and the University of Kansas. And I think that that mix, the gender mix, really helped the organization be recognized. And we are unique. Certainly, very strong feminists were critical in the early days. Take Back the Night marches, students at area colleges. It was really a real mix, and that has continued throughout our tenure. One thing I might note is that our community luncheon, which is quite significant, the second year of that, we found a co-chair who was a male CEO in the community, and his big message was, this is not, and I repeat, this is not just a women's issue. And I think that has been the whole message throughout our tenure.
So you've seen and you've had a lot of diversity in the organizations and the community support that have been involved at the origins of MOCSA and then continuing until today. And I agree. I think that is really unique and special.
Could I make one more comment? I find it very interesting. In fact, Julie introduced me not long ago to someone whose mother was very active in the beginning. Frankly, at the beginning, I would run into people throughout the community who said, well, I was the founder at MOCSA, or I was involved at the very beginning, and I loved it.
Yeah,
I still do.
So it was definitely a collaborative effort with many, many people involved in the founding, huh? What would you say is something unique and special about the organization, Julie?
Well, to piggyback on what Pally said, I think the level of community support that we have um, is really unique. So at our luncheon, we sell that out every year. We have about 1,200 individuals who come to the luncheon to support from all different walks of life. So we have corporations, volunteers, individuals who are coming out to support survivors of sexual violence. And you just don't see that kind of commitment from a community. And I think it's really special for especially survivors who are in that room to see the number of people who are there and who are donating their time and money to make sure that those services are still available. And then I think the other thing about it is the people that work at MOCSA. We have really, really dedicated individuals. And what I hear from new staff and people who resigned from MOCSA is that one of the things that they love the best is the culture of MOCSA. And everybody here is here for the same reason and has the same vision. And so it's really clear what our work is.
Yeah. I've been involved in the anti-violence movement here in Missouri for a number of years, and I've always been so impressed by the staff at MOCSA. You're always doing innovative, interesting things to support survivors. And I've learned so much from your staff over the years. So I couldn't agree more. You've got incredible staff.
Yeah, they're amazing. They teach me things all the time. And I can't imagine what I would do without such an incredible team.
Yeah, and what a privilege that we all have to be able to go to work every day and learn and be inspired by our coworkers. Pally, you mentioned that MOCSA started in 1975 with a startup grant from the federal government. Can you tell us more about the origins and how the ball got rolling uh, on how MOCSA became what it is today?
Well, I think, again, I wasn't around at the time, but, I do recall there was a excellent, there was a public relations push. And on Southwest Boulevard, before I really knew what MOCSA was, I recall driving down this major thoroughfare and seeing this huge billboard with the word rape in huge letters. It was just taking up the whole billboard. And I frankly can't remember what was at the bottom. It probably was call MOCSA or maybe a phone number, but that was a part of the federal law enforcement assistance grant. And again, I think I mentioned earlier that it was really a broad group of people who came together. There were physicians at St. Luke's Hospital who were spending time. The grant was quite comprehensive. In fact, one of our key founders and the captain of the police department responsible for the grant talks about 13 people cramming into a hotel room and over the weekend writing the grant and coming up with the name. But there was someone from the Women's Center at UMKC, a law professor from UMKC, someone from the a key researcher at Midwest. Wait, I'm blocking on that. But at any rate, the key research entity in Kansas City. And just the first executive director was actually a captain at the police department, but just briefly on loan. And then the next executive director, who actually had a national presence, and I was Margaret Jordan, who was a district attorney in Johnson County, Kansas. And she was quite a flamboyant person and very knowledgeable as well. And I remember running into people in Washington who said, "Oh, I knew Margaret Jordan. She was great." I think there's just been a lot that has happened. The synergy is there. It continues to be there. Julie has helped make that happen. And again, dedicated staff, dedicated volunteers.
So, were you all writing a grant to open the first center, to open your first office and hire staff? Is that how the ball started rolling on that?
I really don't know. But however, when I started, probably most people who listen to this won't be aware of the Uptown Theater in Midtown Kansas City, but we were on the third floor of that, and it was these ratty offices. And I was intrigued by the excellent reputation. But if I had only seen the offices, I would not have been impressed. There were 7 staff, and only 2 of us were full time. So it's been a long process.
And when you first started at the organization in the early 80s, what kind of other support services were available to survivors of sexual violence in the Kansas City area?
Well, there was a cadre of volunteers. There always has. And I think, again, it's part of the many people who said, I had a stake in MOCSA very early. There were hospital advocates from the very beginning. There was a group of psychiatric nurses at Western Missouri Mental Health Center handled and facilitated the weekly victim support group. And then a huge issue, and one of the reasons why I think I was considered a strong candidate is that I had a background in child abuse and then child sexual abuse and mental health, because when I started in 1984, there was just a flood of referrals, and the knowledge of child sexual abuse just kind of mushroomed. And much of it, which probably actually perhaps neither of you are aware of, but Ted Danson starred in a TV movie called Something About Amelia. and he was actually the maybe not Amelia, but something like that. And I think just that awareness just ballooned, and children came forward, and the child abuse reporting laws were pretty much in place at that point. And so it was a mushroom.
Interesting. I'm a big fan of Ted Danson myself, so shout out to Ted. But yeah, it is so interesting how social change can often be sparked by television and media and entertainment that then, you know, can cause people to want to start an organization and cause survivors to seek services. So that kind of media attention really can make a big difference. Julie, is there anything you would say about the need for sexual assault services in Kansas City in the early 70s, or kind of what the landscape looked like then?
Yeah, I think just to again follow after Pally, there were a lot of efforts going on, but they weren't collaborating necessarily. And so, with the study that the Kansas City Police Department did, and the research that they conducted, and then their partnership with the Kansas City Women Against Rape organization and some of the other folks who were doing work in this space, they came together to write the grant. Uh, as Callie mentioned, from the Law Enforcement Assistance Association grant. And they were awarded $300,000 to start MOCSA. And so it was really focused on educating law enforcement and prosecutors and increasing the number of sexual assault prosecutions, which I believe went up from like 25% to 80% after they started doing that training. And I know starting the first crisis line, and St. Luke's had donated space at the hospital for the crisis line to be answered 24 hours a day, well before cell phones, when we were now, it seems very antiquated to think about sitting in a room waiting for a call when you could have a cell phone on you. But we had volunteers going and doing that, and then also the hospital advocacy.
Well, I am just fascinated by the history of the anti-violence movement, because we can really look at where we started only 4 decades, 5 decades ago now, and just see how much has changed over the years within the services that are available to survivors, but then also within our culture in general. And so I always love to learn more about the history and the origins of the movement. And I recently read a fascinating book. It's called The Secret History of the Rape Kit, a true crime story by Peggy Kennedy. It came out earlier this year. Listeners, I highly recommend it. And it tells a very interesting story about Marty Goddard. She was a woman in Chicago in the 70s who really recognized the need for collecting forensic evidence in order to bolster the prosecution of sexual assault cases. And so it's about how the work that she did to develop these rape kits, get them implemented in forensic exams, used in forensic exams, and then the man who took credit for her work. And so I recognize that as you are starting these new organizations, these new efforts, it's often forging a new way forward that hasn't been done before. And sometimes there's some resistance and some bumps in the road there. And so I'm just wondering what it was like in the early days of MOCSA's work and starting services for sexual assault survivors that weren't there before. Did you have pushback? I mean, it's really interesting to hear that you had law enforcement on your side from day one. I can imagine that was really helpful. But were there any other challenges that you faced just because this is something that didn't exist before and wasn't there before?
I think the fact that MOCSA's origins were with the police department, that had a great deal to do with it. And the other thing was that the grant was structured such that funding was available to St. Luke's Hospital, which has been a real forerunner actually throughout the nation in terms of sexual assault forensic examination and leadership from the medical perspective. The other thing is that the crime lab in Kansas City was also led by a real forward-looking individual. And I recall back then talking about fingerprints, blood type, because secretors, which is a certain type of person, there is saliva or other kinds of bodily whatever that can indicate your blood type. So blood types were used, fingerprints, bite marks. They were looking at all types of things. cares in order to deal with prosecution. And I do remember the crime lab director telling me about, you know, prosecution is going to be changed forever because in England, there is this new process developed where DNA can be identified, and this will revolutionize prosecution. I don't know what year that was, but it was quite a long while ago.
And it truly did. It truly did
Yeah.
revolutionize prosecution. So you mentioned that when you started at MOCSA in 1984, you were in the third floor of a theater. And so I imagine it was rather grassroots back then. How big was your staff and what kind of services did you provide in 1984?
Well, again, a lot of there were hospital advocates, but I think that typically those advocates went to St. Luke's Hospital because most victims were sent to St. Luke's, even some on the Kansas side. I do know one of the key people in Johnson County in their crime lab at the time was very active in MOCSA's beginnings. And then slowly a few other hospitals became, I don't know, accredited, but went through specialized training. So there were hospital advocates. I'm not sure they were activated 100% of the time. And I'm not sure we could have responded 100% of the time, but that was there. We knew what was best practices, and we're moving forward. Again, the rape victim support group, as I mentioned, were psychiatric nurses. And then when I started, actually, that was when MOCSA merged with a small organization called the Sexual Abuse Treatment Network, which was a group of therapists who were developing programs and treatment modalities to deal with child sexual abuse. The early staff dealt with both provided mainly group therapy for adult survivors of child sexual abuse, as well as victims of sexual assault and children as well. So when I first started, 2 of us were full-time, and then there were 4 who were part-time. So it was a small group.
Oh, wow. And now, Julie, how many staff do you all have?
Oh, we have about 100 staff right now.
Wow, that is impressive. What you can do in 50 years.
Yes, Julie has provided wonderful leadership.
Well, as leaders, go ahead, Julie, sorry.
Oh, I was just going to say, we talk about how much MOCSA has grown, but the reason we were able to do that was because of how we were founded, who was involved, Hallie's leadership, the foresight to start a quasi-endowment that allowed me to take some of those risks because we had something to fall back on if we failed. And so that really was a springboard for us moving forward and growing and increasing and enhancing our services.
I think one thing, it's interesting, I especially always liked it when a new board member started to say, we and our and us. And I think that is kind of the community sort of feeling, and it's important. The other thing I might just kind of comment on, the community luncheon, I had a former board chair join my table, and the board chair at the time spoke to the large group, and he said, we are now committed toward prevention. Chuck, the former board chair, kind of said, we've always been committed to prevention. You know, back in the day, it was more, risk reduction, but true prevention, I understood, and I don't think Chuck would have really fully understood ever, but he knew that we were committed to prevention, so that Julie and her staff have been able to take it to just the next level has just been great.
Oh, yes. That was so exciting to hear about. I think that the issue of prevention has evolved a lot over the last couple of decades, where it really went from what can survivors do to protect themselves to what can we change about social norms in society to make sure that sexual assault never happens in the first place. So before we move on from the early days of MOCSA, I know as you're in your roles as executive directors, as leaders of the organization, you did a lot of fundraising. Is there anything that stands out to you about the earlier days of fundraising? I know you all got that grant from the federal government, but also you had events that now are attended by 1,200 people. So I'm sure that has grown over time. But is there anything you would say about the earlier days of fundraising or kind of unconventional funders you had over the years?
Well, from my perspective, after the federal money, that initial large federal grant dried up, there were some pretty tough times. When I began, I recall that it was great. A major funder in town told the board chair to have me give him a call. And so I called and paid a visit, and he gave me a check for $25,000.
Wow.
Well, $25,000 back then was a lot of money, and we I guess, frankly, I guess I have been proud of my money management ability, and sometimes I wonder if I've been penny wise and pound foolish. I think that looking at that, and then the foresight of some board members saying we need to really look toward developing an endowment, that and the community luncheon, and I think the recognition that the foundation community in Kansas City really understood the importance of MOCSA.
I would add that Hallie and the board were extremely strategic in the way they conducted fundraising. So Hallie was able to draw in executives from major corporations that really back then was just unheard of to support a rape crisis center. And so those corporations pulled in, their staff, their teams to come to the fundraisers. So it was really, really unique. And it's why so many people know about MOCSA now, because people, like Hallie said, like, I'll be at the store or, have my name tag on and somebody will be like, oh my gosh, I come to every luncheon that MOCSA has. But I think it was just the dynamic individuals that were involved who understood how to raise money, how to get people involved in a meaningful way to contribute and really feel part of the organization.
Yeah.
The other thing I might note is that especially, well, I don't know exactly when, but as board members would come and then their friends would know that they were on the board and their friends would tell them about their own experiences. And so that, what better to develop a commitment to the cause than to know that someone close to you and that you care about has been touched by this issue.
Yeah, I think that really speaks to the personal nature of this issue and how those personal experiences can draw people to action and want to support other people who might experience sexual assault. Well, thanks for speaking to those issues. I think they're really important. As you look back over the last 5 decades, we have come a long way. There's a lot that have been achieved. There's been public policy achievements, growth in services, growth in funding opportunities. Are there any milestones that stand out to you as you look back over the last 5 decades that you'd like to speak to?
I think for me, it's the Violence Against Women Act and having some dedicated funding through that, some federal funding. I think the Victims of Crime Act was another played a really important role in specifically domestic and sexual violence, but also all victim services. So I think those are 2 big milestones. And I think the Me Too movement, obviously, has had a big impact and has really elevated the issue. And what I think is so powerful about that, and it's back to Pally, like just saying that you're a board member or you're involved and people will share their stories. But that movement really gave voice to survivors to feel like it was okay to come forward and say that they had survived sexual violence and dispelling the shame and those myths that go along with it. So I think that was a really critical time in our history, because now, never before, have we talked about this so openly in our society.
Yeah.
I so agree, Julie. And Beck, I mentioned the tough times, but actually VOCA and then the Violence Against Women Act both provided kind of some stability for basic services. And then the fundraising was kind of added to that stability and ability to serve the community.
Yeah, I think the other unique thing too, Pally, as I reflect on, our donors, Kansas City had a lot of philanthropic families that really invested in our community and really take that seriously. And so I think that was really helpful as well.
A lot of
Excellent
pride from
point.
Kansas City. I know. So there was really amazing things that have happened at the federal level in the last 50 years, VOCA, FAWA, the Me Too movement. There's also really exciting things that happened public policy wise in Missouri, thanks to advocates at MOCSA, advocates from across the state coming to Jefferson City and making policy changes happen. We have sexual violence included in orders of protection, and we have marital rape becoming illegal in 1991. We have the rollout of telehealth happening this year. Well, forensic exams will be available using telehealth technology. And so, is there anything that's happened here in the Missouri movement that also stands out as a milestone to you?
No, but I do remember Colleen Coble and marital rape. She had a lot to do with making that happen. And so that's very much appreciated in terms of the leadership that's been provided by the state coalition.
Yeah, Colleen is our former CEO and primary lobbyist for many years.
I think one of the recent things, just off the top of my head, that I think about is the genital exams done on individuals who are going in for surgery. And so in teaching hospitals, oftentimes women would get genital exams when they were going in, let's say for an appendicitis, like let's practice and you can do a genital exam. And so that has also been outlawed without a individual's consent.
Yes. And that came out of a couple legislative sessions ago and a huge victory. I agree. So we've talked about some of the successes that have occurred at MOCSA. You've obviously grown, implemented new innovative services. And I think a lot of that can be attributed to some of your forward-thinking leadership. And so it's not always natural to talk about yourself, but you have both achieved so much at leading the organizations of MOCSA. So when you look back on your time at MOCSA, what's something that you're really proud of achieving, of having had achieved as a leader?
I was asked that some time ago, and I really couldn't come up with anything.
There's so many things, aren't there?
But I guess it's just continuing and growing and stabilizing and laying, I don't know, maybe it's the frugality of my parents, but I guess I am proud of being financially helping the organization be financially sound. And I guess I do remember sitting at a fundraising table or some kind of table with a funder and someone else, and the funder said, one thing I like about MOCSA as a grant maker is that MOCSA does what it says it's going to do. And I just always thought that every organization that got a grant did what they were supposed to do. But I guess that isn't the case. And so I'm proud of our staff and our commitment to excellence and doing what we say we're going to do.
Yes.
Yeah, I think, Hallie, again, you and the staff and the board laid that groundwork for us that built a great reputation in the community, knew that we could be counted on, knew that things would be handled appropriately, not only stabilizing the organization, but creating an infrastructure through policies and procedures to make sure that we had that strong foundation to build on. Made it so much easier when I came in because all I had to do was continue that work on. So I think you really have done a lot. 26 years. I think back to, and I was just talking with our new employee group this morning about how back in the East, there was that real push to combine domestic and sexual violence organizations throughout the nation. And in Kansas City, again, because of your leadership, Hallie, we maintained our own organization because the community and everybody involved felt like it was so important to have a single focus that MOCSA has to support survivors of sexual violence. And that has allowed us to do the innovative things like looking at community violence prevention. One of the things, Nora, that I'm really proud of is we're in a capital campaign right now, and we're getting ready to start construction. And so this will be the first time that survivors have a physical place where it's built intentionally for them as a place for them. And it goes back to the work that Pally and our founders did building the community support and having them recognize the importance of a single focused organization like MOCSA focused just on sexual violence.
That is so exciting to hear about.
Well, and Julie has really provided excellent leadership and is well regarded.
Well, hats off to you both. Thank you for all your hard work. It's surely has made a huge difference. So the world has changed a lot since 1975, and that has impacted services. You talked about how prevention has evolved from addressing risk reduction to addressing the root causes of sexual violence. What are some other ways that services have evolved over the years?
I would say, just the more we have learned about the impacts of trauma from, childhood trauma to adult trauma and how to treat trauma and using the new techniques that are out. So EMDR, TFCBT, all of those different techniques in treating trauma of individuals has been really helpful and has made a huge impact on survivors.
I agree. As I was thinking about our conversation, I was reminded of an NPR story. Researcher was talking about PTSD, and his comment was that rape victims, sexual assault victims experience PTSD almost on a very close to 100%, and it's not nearly that high for people who have been in combat. And I think everyone thinks about the effects of war and combat on individuals' emotional health, but people don't talk about sexual assault as much, and it's sort of swept under the rug.
Yeah.
But that was very telling to me. And it's so good to know that we have ways to help victims and survivors deal with that.
Yeah.
I think also recognizing, the recognition that healing is a process and not an event, and that we talk with parents about this when kids come in, or they may go through 12 sessions and they are able to manage, and then they may hit a developmental milestone, and they may have to come back in for a check-in. And that's okay. And it's a normal part of the process of trauma. And so being able to recognize that and have people understand that it's okay. We all deal with this. It's just like any other issue that comes up.
Yep. I think as our understanding of the science behind trauma has increased, we are better able to support survivors. And it's really been exciting to see. I agree. So I'm so glad you both spoke to that. Julie, you took over leadership of MOCSA in 2012. How did you get involved in the organization?
Well, it's interesting because I had been aware of MOCSA since I moved to Kansas City in 93. So I moved up here as a social worker, and I started my work as a children's division investigator. Back in the time, it was called DFS. And so I remember that MOCSA would come and they would train us on child sexual abuse and how to recognize it and how to talk about it with parents. And then also, obviously, would be referring folks to MOCSA for therapy services. And then I went into the Child Advocacy Center field and was a forensic interviewer for many years. And again, just had a really close relationship with MOCSA through that time. And so when Hallie decided to retire, it was just a great opportunity for me to, because of the comprehensive nature of what MOCSA did, to move into an organization that really looked at sexual violence comprehensively. So not just responding, not just treating, but also educating and preventing, and look at the community level prevention. So it was just an honor to take over after Pally, and she made it so easy. It's often hard when you think about coming in after somebody who's been a leader at an organization for 26 years, but the grace and support that was provided really will be successful in that. So I'm forever grateful.
And how wonderful that you already had some familiarity with the work of the organization and such positive experiences in the past with it. It's 2025 is MOCSA's 50th anniversary. What are you all doing to celebrate 50 years of MOCSA?
Well, Pally mentioned the Legacy Committee. So as part of our anniversary, we decided to take the opportunity to make sure that we commemorated and documented our history. So we had an oral historian work with us, and we put together a video project where people from, the gentleman that Pally talked about being in the Kansas City Police Department, who was in a hotel room with 13 others, typing away the first grant, interviewing him and another one of our founders with the Kansas City Women's Rape Group. So we were able to find people throughout the history of MOCSA who would come in and tell what things were like at that time. So that's one exciting thing, and we'll be highlighting that through videos throughout the year and at our community luncheon.
Can the
then I think the
public find those videos? Are they going to be available anywhere?
Yeah, they are on Facebook and Instagram at MOCSA KC.
Great. Well, I've caught one of them on Instagram and it's so good. It's just really cool to hear people talking about the origins of the movement.
It really is interesting. One of the interviews was with the first prosecutor that the grant funded. So that first grant that we had funded a female prosecutor to focus solely on sexual assault cases in Jackson County. And so she came back and was interviewed about her work at that time.
Great. Anything else you're doing for the 50th?
We are we're under construction with our building. So I think that's a huge highlight as well, celebrating our 50th.
That is very exciting. Any idea when that new building will be opening?
We believe it will open in summer of 2026.
Wow, right around the corner. I can't wait to come visit.
Time flies. It'll be here in no time.
Well, happy 50th. That's just an incredible achievement to see all the things that you all have done over the years. As we've talked about how services have changed over the years, is there anything else you would like to speak to about current services and what's available now? Anything innovative happening that you're excited about?
I think I spoke about it a little bit earlier, but our community level violence prevention efforts. So we're working in different communities throughout the Kansas City area, focusing on the root causes of sexual violence. And so not only bringing awareness and education, but also talking about the lived environment and what can change in the lived environment that supports violence or contributes to violence happening. And so how can we as a community come together to address those root causes? So changing the environment. So adding streetlights, getting community groups together around these issues, because if you know your community, if you know your neighbors, you're going to be looking out for them. So doing a lot of that work to help prevent violence from happening in the first place.
Yep. And that community connectedness is an evidence-based strategy to prevent sexual violence. And so you all are doing a lot to foster community collaboration. And you have for a long time. In fact, those are in the origins of MOCSA as an organization that the community came together and made it happen. But I would also say, as you're bringing the community together, you all are also very actively involved in community efforts. You're providing education to the community. You serve on boards. You've served on the coalition board. So can you talk about how, in addition to the work you're doing to support survivors, you also make time and energy to be involved in the community, to come and talk on podcasts? Why has that been an important part of your work and what impact has it had?
I think it's a hugely important part of the work to make sure that people think about MOCSA, think about survivors, making sure that if a news station calls and they want a survivor's perspective or they want information about how something that's happened in the community could impact a survivor, that we're available in there to talk about that. I think really giving voice to survivors is really important in drawing people into the movement. And still, after 50 years, there are still individuals in our community who aren't aware of MOCSA. And so the more I can get out, the more I can help other people, the more I can be involved, the more MOCSA is known throughout the community.
And I think that's been just a part of the history. Always there has been that desire to be there, comment, make the community aware of the services. And really, I think MOCSA has always been recognized by the news stations locally and even occasionally nationally who have been called upon.
Yeah. So it's something that you always had at the beginning and you never really strayed away from.
Right.
Well, I think MOCSA also has a reputation for being very supportive of staff. I think many years ago, I remember hearing about yoga sessions that you hosted for staff. And it seems like you're always on the lookout for new things you can do to support staff, to sustain staff. in work that can be really challenging and can expose both staff to vicarious trauma. And so, can you speak to kind of what you think sustains staff in this work and the steps that you all have taken at MOCSA to really support staff?
Thanks. I appreciate you recognizing that because we have been very intentional about making sure that our team is able to be there for themselves so that they can support others. So we have implemented things like a sabbatical. So that was just a couple of years ago that we implemented that, making sure that people have sustained time away from work where they can just focus on themselves and their families and what they enjoy, to really get a break because we know that when our team goes home at the end of the night, it's not uncommon to get a call or a text from a friend who's having an issue or who has a concern about sexual violence or who's been triggered and needs someone to talk to, or to see a story on TV, in the news, or even in TV shows. And so it's hard to really get away from the issue. So we think it's really important to do that. But we also support people with paid sick leave and extended sick leave and family leave. Also making sure that it's a part of the supervision process so that we're talking about it with others. We've made simple changes like if you're on the crisis line overnight, you don't have to come into the office the next morning. You're finished. Or if you go out on 2 calls to a hospital, that's it. You're off the call shift until a couple days later. So making sure that we have those resources and that we're getting volunteers who can supplement where we can't be there. So just being really intentional about how we think about it. I think, and Pally, you probably remember this too and experienced this. I know I still have to check myself, but I was just used to go, 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 and never stopping to think about the impact that the work I did had on me personally. And what has been nice is that younger generations are very much in tune with how they're being impacted and really want to talk about that. So it's nice to be able to recognize, not just for staff, but also for myself, that it's okay to take time and take care of myself. And so we really want to instill that in our team. And we just put certain things in place that can help take the load off of people. We also have an amazing team who steps up for others when they see that that they just had like a really bad crisis line call, or they had a challenging hospital run, or maybe had like the 15th grant report in a row that they had to submit in 5 days. And so just recognizing that people need that mental break from the work that we're doing.
Yeah. Often when we talk about self-care, we talk about these things that you can do, the steps you can take as an individual to take care of yourself. But these organizational strategies can make all the difference in the world. What would you add to that, Allie?
No, I think that Julie's done an amazing job in terms of making certain that these things are in place. And frankly, when I first heard about the sabbatical, I thought, wow, that is really great. And that's probably one of the things that's been the advantage of the organization having grown. There is that depth and that ability because the staff really, it has always been good and concerned about each other and wanting to do the best job possible and willing to step up so somebody else can take care of themselves.
I'm curious to ask you, Pally, when you think about your leadership for 26 years, what sustained you for that huge amount of time?
Well, I don't, I think one thing I always thought about was monsters to rainbows. I loved seeing kids' artwork. And when they first came and there would be monsters and then the same kid would then move to sunshine and rainbows. And so monsters to rainbows, that's probably the biggest thing. And a supportive spouse and family and my son, lots of things. Yes.
Monsters to rainbows. That one's going to stick with me. We've got to hold on to those rainbows out there, right?
Right.
Well, as we're wrapping up our episode, I'd love to hear what you are hoping for the future of MOCSA. What are your hopes and dreams for the next 50 years of the organization?
Well, I'm just looking forward to hearing what Julie has to say because I'm sitting here with my gray hair and in retirement. So and just enjoying seeing all the things that are happening that MOCSA is in such a good place. So take it away, Julie.
Thanks, Pally. I think for the next 50 years, building on just continuing to build and grow and taking what we know as best practice and implementing it. I think also sharing the techniques and things that we have learned. We have such a wealth of information on MOCSA, so really being able to contribute to that knowledge about sexual violence at a national level. Really my dream is that we can pull back on our advocacy work, and in the forefront will be the prevention work so that nobody ever has to be a victim of sexual violence. That's my dream.
That is a beautiful dream, and I can't wait to celebrate that in 50 years. So as we're ending our episode, any final thoughts that you want to speak to as we're celebrating 50 years of MOCSA?
It's just been a great run. I guess that's what I could say, and let's just keep it going.
Yeah, I would just say I can't, I don't think I ever would have believed we're at the place we are now with sexual violence, where it is a topic of conversation. I remember back when I started in this work, I always used to say, boy, I could end a dinner party really quickly.
Thank you for joining us. This has been a recorded conversation now available in both video and podcast formats. A video recording of this episode is available on the MOCADSV YouTube channel under the Momentum for Change playlist. Please subscribe to our YouTube channel in order to receive new episodes in your YouTube feed. You can also find all of our Momentum for Change episodes available to stream on Spotify or wherever you find your podcasts. Momentum for Change is a podcast produced by MOCADSV with post-production support provided by Tim Stillings and promotion by Adrian Maddox. Again, I am your host, Nora Mosby, and we appreciate you joining us for this episode. Thank you again, and we look forward to seeing you next month.